There's a lot of detail in this photo, more than I could imagine. You might be thinking, I mean, it's a nice macro shot, maybe, but what's the big deal? The big deal is, this is only a fraction of the whole photo. This is the whole thing. I was zoomed in this much. That's a ton of detail to have in a photo, and the stuff you can do with it is pretty redonkulous. I'm Addy, welcome back to Analog Dreams. Nikon lent me their flagship Z9 mirrorless camera for review, and while most of my time was spent on its glorious full-frame 8.3K video modes over on my main channel, I did take it out for a couple quick photo shoots with my family, and honestly, I wish I had spent more time shooting photos with it, because it's the most excited I've been about digital photography in a while. I used to primarily shoot on the Canon 6D Mark II for my digital photos, this guy right here, but I sold it earlier in the year in preparation for a move to a more hybrid camera upgrade that did photos and videos better for most of my work. I'm most likely going with the Canon R5C, but Nikon gave me the opportunity to review this in the meantime, and I was impressed way beyond what I thought I could be. I'm kinda sad I have to give this back now. In the interim, since I sold my main shooter, I've just been shooting expired film all year, which has been fun, and I really didn't expect to care much for digital photography for a while, but the shooting potential from this is just so solid that I'm back in the digital world. The Nikon Z9 is a full frame camera, meaning it has the full 35mm sensor akin to a full frame of film, whereas most cameras that a lot of people typically own are cropped, either APS-C or Super 35mm with a 1.5 or 1.6x crop, like many of the Sony bodies or the Fuji X-T3 and X-T4, or Micro Four Thirds, like the Panasonic G7 and G85 with a 2x crop. That means you have a much bigger sensor to let in more light, to capture more detail, and to have a wider field of view, but you do have to pay more for lenses. The camera shoots 45.7 megapixel photos. That's a lot of detail, coming out to 8280 by 5520 resolution. Big enough for print, big enough to crop like 500 times in print, lots of room to correct for angles or framing issues. It's wild. In fact, it's so detailed that I've actually started to increase the density of the filters that I shoot with. I tend to shoot a lot of my stuff, at least video-wise for sure, with black pro mist filters to add some natural diffusion to my shots, a look I just generally prefer as an analog and film enthusiast, to help with my background lights and to make my skin look a little bit more pleasing on camera. But even in video mode at 8K, which is still 33 megapixels by the way, it's so detailed that you can see basically every pore and hair on my face. It's just too much. The video is so detailed you can basically treat the video mode as a continuous shooting photo mode and still shoot higher resolution RAW than any photo camera that I've owned up to this point. Just to be clear, you do not need a camera this expensive or good to get started in photography, nor to even do it full time as a career, as a job. In fact, I still hope to eventually get a small Fuji X-T3 or X-T4 kit to be more portable run and gun style shooting when I can. But a big part of my artistic interests and endeavors is being able to capture the world as I see it and to have as much room to manipulate my images as I can. And at this point in my career, gear of this caliber gets me there. Raw performance in this camera is nice, with tons of highlight recovery and decent amounts of shadow recovery too. In photo mode, it does a little bit better than in video mode on those shadows. Autofocus really shines on this camera, with tracking modes for people, for animals, and for vehicles. People and animal modes also have eye detection for the autofocus, which saves a ton of time and hassle. And there's even an auto mode to automatically swap between the different subject tracking. I can get really close with the autofocus. Does a great job. The only issue here is it performs worse the darker your scene is. So if you overexpose your shot to hell and back, like your subject's getting blasted with the sun, performs fine. But once it starts getting dark, it loses its grip pretty quick. And even shots where it thinks it hits the subject that you tapped on don't always come out. I was obsessed with treating this as a faux macro shooter and cropping in on small subjects to great success overall. But these little tree frogs at night were basically impossible to autofocus on. Physically, you have buttons and dials for just about everything you need, and a lot of grips and ergonomics are really considered here, and you even have a dedicated photo and video mode switch. The only issue here that I have is that you have to hold a button to change ISO, instead of just spinning a wheel on the menu D-pad or something like basically every other camera does. There's a screen on top that displays your settings, how much, how many shots or how much video runtime you have left on your memory card, how much battery life you have, and so on. And some of these even display when the camera is off, so you still have a glance at that without having to power it all on. Pretty nice. The lens they sent me for it as well even has a screen on it to determine where, the distance at which it's focused and things like that, which is pretty wild. The only big downside here is that it's big. It's a big camera. It's very heavy for what it is. But the upside is that it essentially has a battery grip built in with controls for shooting in portrait mode and a giant battery that lasted longer than any similar style camera that shoots higher quality video on the market right now. Way longer than the tiny LP-E6 batteries in the Blackmagic Pocket cameras, as well as the Canon R5 and R5C. It's a good battery. The camera has full-size HDMI out for monitoring or live video in 8K 30 and 4K 120, USB 3.2 Type-C port for photo transfer or tethering, and it even has full-size Ethernet for controlling the camera over your network or transferring photos within a photo studio. It can work wirelessly too. It shoots on CF Express cards though, which will be a lot more expensive for your storage compared to SD cards or USB-C SSD recording. All in all, I'm still most likely to go with the R5C, just because I'm already pretty invested in Canon glass from all my previous shooting, all my previous cameras. I don't have the budget or capacity to magically just swap all this, with a wave or something to Nikon mount glass. But it was nice to play with such a high quality Nikon camera for the first time. Well, aside from, my film one from the 80s. And if I was shopping for my first big shooter, I might have gone for the Z9 if size wasn't an issue. It's that good. What are you shooting on these days? Comment below and go check out my full video and streaming focused review over on my main channel, Fox, or on Nebula. And remember to be kind, rewind.